Goodbye, Dan. No. Oh, or echo camera. Reduce the echo, but reverb. You got to reverb, just reduce it. So it doesn't go. Right, okay. Good afternoon, everyone. I think, as you can see from the title, from Biafra to diaspora, right? But I want you, when I'm speaking, think very, very carefully of the words I'm saying, because what I'm about to present to you is something that is relatively new in the world of scientific literature, but really applies to us in a detailed way. So, before I get into the title of the presentation, let me just ask, now, we read about the serious. Delay. 1, 2. But I'm going on the mic. Okay, hold on. All like this. 1, 2. Yes. Okay. I'd like to ask everyone a question, right? So I'm going to list a number of issues or a number of areas, just a number of things, right? Okay, so they may sound random, but bear with me, right? How parents speak to their children sometimes in a very pushy way. The apathy that people have when it comes to coming to things like meeting. Jealousy of one another sometimes. Obesity, hypertension, even being in the diaspora, mansions back home that are empty. What do all of these things I just mentioned, and many more, have in common? Can anyone state that? I mentioned a few things. Even Iba boy. What of all these things have in common?
Iba boy.
Yes, with everything I've just said now. Whether it's jealousy or mansion back home, the fact that we're in the diaspora, Iba boy, apathy. I'm a Iba boy. But what do all of these things have in common?
Relationship.
No. Interesting.
All these are common in Ndigbo land.
Yes.
People culture.
Trauma.
Ego.
Trauma. All of these things I mentioned, trauma, right? So the title of my presentation here is From Biafra to the Diaspora, but more importantly, understanding intergenerational trauma amongst Ndigbo, right? So I want you to bear that in mind, because it's something that is new in the scientific literature, but it's becoming a big area. So we're going to talk about Biafra very quickly. We all know that it's 1967 to 1970, no big deal, right? But hunger was used as a weapon of war, right? So they blocked, Oni and Port Harcourt and all the ports, and we were starving. More importantly, protein. The lack of protein was a big issue, right? Which obviously for the young ones caused kwashiorkor. We know that, right? And we know that estimates vary. On the lower side, 1 million, on the high side, 5 million people died, and also, even after the war, we were defeated, which is very important. Second World War, right? Germans were defeated, the British won. Different psychologies. If you win or you lose, irrespective of what happened, how many people suffered during the war. So Biafra was defeated, meaning that there was a number of punitive policies that are even still in place today. And one of them, as you know, is the 20-pound policy. So what does all of this mean? It means that this wasn't just a war. It was a total collapse of safety, wealth, and trust. I want you to bear those in mind. Safety, wealth, and trust. So let's look at the biological blueprint. We're talking biology now, right? We're talking about the body. So, who here has heard of epigenetics? If you've heard of epigenetics, apart from my wife, because you were there when I was presenting to you, has anybody here heard of epigenetics? Okay, it's been around as a scientific field for about 50 years, right? And it's still being learned. But essentially what it means is that if you look at your genes. So you know your genes, we know it has DNA, and it has protein-based RNA. We know that, right? That's your genes. And your genes means that you have traits passed from your parents, Mendel's theory, right? A, B, you know, A, blah, 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 right? So that's your genes. But what's interesting is, as much as you have your genes are not necessarily set. Your genes are made up of switches. He's a medical guy there, he knows all these things, right? They're made up of switches. And these switches can turn on and off depending on a number of factors. And that's called gene expression. So epi means above, on top of. So on top of the genes, epigenetics. So what that means is, depending on your environment, right, certain things can turn on or turn off. And therefore your genes will be expressed differently. So I'll give you an example, right? Let's say you're in an environment with a lot of stress. And stress produces certain hormones, right? So cortisol, adrenaline, what have you. If it's continuous, after a while, it starts to develop a certain set of proteins that now start to impact certain switches, and your genes can change. So you have scenarios where you have twins, two twins. One grows up in one scenario, another grows up in a different scenario, and then they become very different. They were the same at birth, more or less, genetically, but they become very different because of the environment. So there are lots of studies around this, right? Because I know that last time I presented, the professor said, we want to know what studies. And these are some of the most famous studies, what they call the Dutch hunger winter study. During the Second World War, there was a man-made famine in the Netherlands, and a lot of people starved. It was pretty bad. So three generations later, in 2008, a study was conducted of their great-grandchildren, right? And they compared their health relative to a control study, those that were not involved, their grandparents or great-grandparents were not involved in the study. And they found that those whose great-grandparents were suffering from hunger at that time had certain traits, started suffering certain conditions, right? And they did the same study with the Holocaust trauma. It's called the Holocaust Trauma Epidemic Study, Epigenetic Study. And they found that the offspring, 2-3 generations later, of those that suffered during the Holocaust had particular diseases or particular conditions. Not everyone, but when you have a control study, you see that there were more of those in that population that had this. And then the third area was also racial trauma from slavery. African Americans, right? They were also going through things, and they found 3 particular areas, right? One was metabolic syndrome issues like hypertension, all of those things to do with getting big and having hypertension, heart attack, strokes, all of those things. Another was schizophrenia, right? Neurological issues. And so here are what they call the areas, right? Which during the Biafran time, when, for example, there is absolutely no protein, the body then gets very, very good at metabolizing with calories, hoarding calories. The body gets good, right? And what happens is that after the Biafran War, when they have children, and the children have children, that genetic expression is still the same. And then your body gets good at hoarding calories. Anyhow, much better than someone else whose parents or grandparents were involved in the Biafran War. Because they were hungry. Because they needed protein. So the body's metabolic system was designed in that scenario to be able to hold on to calories. So now we're in a situation where we're holding on to too many calories. You're thinking that maybe it's because we're eating English food, maybe, or maybe because we're not working hard as much, going to the farm or what have you. But the main reason is that our metabolic system, our genetic expression, is now designed to hold on to calories as a method of survival, as what our grandparents did or our parents did during the war, right? And then another area is a similar thing. It's called the LEP gene, where again it conserves calories as well. So it's 2 different issues, but they both conserve calories. And the last is what they call the HPA axis. But it's based on cortisol. So cortisol, as you know, is the hormone that deals with stress, right? And there was a lot of stress. We know that. Those that were in the war or heard about those in the war know about the bombs and the air raids and the rest of it. There's a lot of stress. Have you thought about what that stress did to your body? More importantly, how that stress changed the switches of your genes, your genetic expression, so that your offspring will now have a similar stress scenario, right? Now I'm talking biological here, right? So these are things where you have to bear in mind that because of things like this stress, you start having conditions, or your children and your great-grandchildren start having conditions. So let me give an example. The sugar trap. So it's called the thrifty gene. And the thrifty gene is all about storing as I said, storing sugar. So when you're in a high sugar environment, you're so easily able to store sugar, as opposed to those who were not involved, whose parents were not involved in that kind of stress, or that kind of lack of protein. So your body gets good at holding on to sugar. And so that's why now you have high rates of diabetes, of hypertension in our community. A lot of it is down to your genetic expression. Not your genes, but how your genes are expressed to now become an issue when it comes to this kind of scenario. So when you think, why is it that in the black community, or why is it that in the Igbo community we have a lot of hypertension issues or diabetes issues? A lot of it is how your genes are expressed. And it's what happened due to trauma. So I'm talking about the physical effects of trauma at the moment, right? And that's where epigenetics comes in. And it doesn't affect just you, it affects your children and your grandchildren and your great-grandchildren, generations to come. Or you might have issues around stress, right? So everyone knows about PCOS. So the premenstrual cystic, what's it called? PCOS.
Perimenopause?
No. Is
Polycystic
ovarian
syndrome.
Yeah, PCOS.
PCOS.
So again, it's been linked through studies to trauma from parents and grandparents, particularly during war scenarios. And in this case, it's the Biafran War, right? And then finally, we have neurodivergence. Now, not everyone likes to talk about ADHD, but ADHD, or at least the I don't know if you know about ADHD. So, does everybody know?
Attention deficit.
Everybody knows what ADHD is, right? So ADHD is rife in the Igbo community, but parents may not want to talk about it, or may not have diagnosed it, right? But it is rife. But the question is why? If you compare it to another control group, it's not as prevalent. And what studies are saying is that it may not be ADHD, but misdiagnosed ADHD. And that it may be that it's genetic expression of the hypervigilance or the hyperactivity, because if you remember during the war, you're never sure when the bomb's coming or when you're warned. So you're always in a state of high alert. That sets your genetic expression, which can go on to your children. And then suddenly you have kids who are hypervigilant, hyper alert, if you see what I mean, who now have scattered focus. Because to focus on one thing means that you're not thinking about anything else, which is not possible during the war. You have to be ready to be focused. Your focus changes immediately. And so those kids and grandkids now get misdiagnosed with ADHD. And really, it's just genetic expression, right? So these are some of the health outcomes of the physical effects of intergenerational trauma. Now let's go on to some of the behavioral traits. Not biological now, behavioral. So again, behavior is also transgenerational or intergenerational, right? So let's look at this. This is a positive thing. We're looking at positive things, which may not always be positive, but they're positive in this scenario. So we're hyper-industrious. Indeed, but everyone knows that. You talk about Igbos, entrepreneurs, we're making bucks. You know, we do this, we go to China, we do this, and what have you. Do you know that, yes, we were industrious before Biafra, but we were not hyper-industrious until after Biafra. If you notice, we were industrious, so yeah, you know, Jajo Popo, blah, 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 that's true. But after Biafra, man, everybody was just hustling. Every single one, even if you're a doctor, you're hustling on the side, right? Why? Well, that's born from having absolutely nothing after the war. And so everybody in their mind started thinking, we just need to make sure that this never happens again. So everybody's hustling to make sure that we never be in a position where we have 0 or 20 pounds again. And that's where Iba Boy comes in. Where you now start saying, let us not rely. We had Iba Boy. I know, but I'm telling you, after the war, it took off like another thing.
Yeah.
And that's because before the war, it was only the Igbos, and this is true, it was only the Igbos that had faith in the federal government. That felt we are Nigeria.
Yeah.
True,
It's
true.
optional.
We never said we are Igbos.
No.
Yeah, I'm telling you, I don't know, you call me tribalist, whatever, but the Fulanis and the Hausas are like, we are Hausa,
Yeah.
or we are Northerners, should I say. Yorubas are, we are Yoruba, it's true. But Igbos are like, we are Nigeria,
Yeah.
right? We were the ones, after the war, everyone's like, we have to create our own system. We can't rely on Nigerian institutions, right? And so that's why Iba Boy took off in a big way, right? Iyo Mabia or Iyo. And then one area, the final area of this slide is, as you know, is adaptive migration. When they say anywhere you go in the world, you see an Igbo person. It wasn't like that before the war. But after the war, we lost trust in Nigeria. And we had to just go where, yes, go to where we make money, that's true. But it's not just that. Go so that we will not be persecuted again, like we were persecuted back home. That's why in our minds, we started to migrate anyhow. So much so that those that left Nigeria either making serious money or can't leave Nigeria. Japan is just a big thing amongst Ndigbo, right? But that Japan is not just guy, it's because we can't be in a position where we lose out and we are persecuted again. And racism is not persecution. It's not persecution like back home, it's not the same thing, right? So we can deal with the racism. But we can't deal where, you know, very soon you're surrounded, they start shooting you anyhow. Right? We can't do that. So these are the positive traits, but they're all from trauma. All of these things happened because we were severely traumatized as a people. So trauma created a super competitive neurotype. But let's look at the negative sides of behavior, some of the negative areas, right? I put the Ikenga here because if you know about Ikenga is about force of movement. Yeah? A man will just go and make it. And it's really about individualism. I'm a man, I will go out there and I will make it. Right? Even though Igbo is about community and democracy, Ikenga is about the man. You know, Nto, right? If I get to the right age, I will get an Ikenga in my Iba or in my OP. I'm a man. Okay? In those days. So, but then after the war, that trait of individualism became hyper. So we became hyper vigilant, which means that we're always scanning to make sure that we're not betrayed, right, by anyone, which is why we don't trust each other. Or don't you know? Let's be real. We don't trust each other, right? And we might argue that you're from that side, or I'm from this side, or you're from this town. But even in the town, you don't trust each other. You say that village, or that family, or whatever. But that trust wasn't like that before the war. I'm telling you that's the issue of trauma. We've lost trust in each other, right? But also, we are always accumulating stuff. We are accumulating property. Why is it that one guy will live in a 2-bedroom flat in London, and when he goes back home, it's a 16-bedroom with a 100-bathroom mansion back home, empty? Why? Why? Well, it's from trauma and immediate, right? And no solar, no generator, but it's still there. Right? But the reason is that it's an emotional reaction. He needs to have armor and he needs to have money to make sure he feels comfortable. So he's never in that position where he has nothing. You see what I mean? And because he can't rely on the state, because the state let us down, you have to rely on yourself. That's why you hustle. And that's why if anyone is trying to hustle with you and you get out of your way, just get out of his way. Even if you're another Igbo person, stay out of my way. I'm a hyper-competitive individual, right? It's negative. As a negative effect of trauma, but it's a realistic effect of trauma. And then you have institutional apathy. You know when I mentioned that people don't come to meeting, but people like, it's from trauma now. Igbo people were having heavy meeting before the war. In Kaduna, Kano, Sokoto, Lagos, right? Enugu, I was called big ones, powerful ones, right? And we also trusted the state. We trusted our federal government. We trusted our state governments. And after the war, we lost trust. We lost trust in institutions. And ICAM is an institution.
Yes.
And so therefore, you might say, nah, forget this meeting, Joe. I'm not going to go, blah, blah. It's from trauma. That's all. So I don't blame you guys. It's because you don't trust institutions because they let you down.
Yeah.
This is all psychological.
Yeah.
You're not consciously thinking about it, but that's what's happening.
Exactly.
That's what's happening. So when I remember when I was chair, I said, come on, you can come to ICAM on your own steam. I don't have to be begging you, right? And then people say, chair, we love coming to ICAM because of your personality. Oh, you're coming to ICAM for my personality. And that's why. What about coming to ICAM because you want to? Trust.
Yes, trust.
We lost trust. And this is also intergenerational. Where is our children now? It comes from trust. They picked up the lack of trust from the parents. And they too lack trust. Sometimes the children will say, this Igbo business, forget it, man. Trust, right? So, and that is all from the war. I want you to understand that all of these traits that we have, individualism, competitiveness, jealousy, blah, 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 all comes from trauma. So you can't blame it in a bad way. It's natural. But we have to recognize that it's real. That's the issue. So here are 3 generations. I mentioned 3 generational trauma, right? So this is the first generation, the baby boomers. Let's call them G1, first generation, which is the generation that were in the war, physically in the war. And we'll call them survivors, right? Their focus is silence. They don't like talking about the war. Not really. They don't like, more importantly, they don't like talking to themselves about the war in their minds or trying to go through a cathartic experience to get over things. They rather just put it to the side. And that in itself is dangerous, right? And so therefore they have what they call a vow of silence. And look at their parenting style, authoritarian and fear-based. They have a deep mistrust for outsiders. Come on, our parents were always authoritarian. So if my mom was here now, I'll tell her that she's authoritarian, right? And let's be real, us kids, first and second generation, no, it's not African parents. It's not necessarily. They were very authoritarian. I know that they were before the war, but it was different after the war. Because then, at that point, it's like, you can't put yourself in the position that I was in during the war. So I'm going to make sure that you study and get that first class, whether it kills both of us today. Right? But before, it was more like, we want you to study so that you can move up mobility. Now is you must study so that you will not be in a position where we were before. Right? And so they become authoritarian. But that affects our kids. So here's the second generation, what we call the builders. Don't you know that the things that are affecting the second generation, my generation, right? And sometimes Gen Ys as well, to an extent. The thing that affects them is anxiety and achievement. I'm always anxious that I'm not doing well enough, good enough for my mom and dad. And achievement is the only thing on my mind. I can't even just try and understand life at my own pace. I must achieve, or else I am a failure and a shame, right? And that comes from the authoritarian parenting. So now we have this issue. We're high achievers, degrees coming out of our ashes anyhow, right? But we have anxiety. How many doctors end up just having all kinds of breakdowns? Yes, particularly as junior doctors, because they will say, I didn't even want to be a doctor. Right? But the point is that they're high achievers, yes, they go on the first class and the rest of it, but they have anxiety. Why? Again, it comes from trauma. First generation trauma affecting second generation, which creates a new form of trauma, even though they went to the war themselves. Right? And so therefore they have this burden, whether in the diaspora in England, but at the same time they're trying to beat the Nigeria, and they have this tension between the two. Right? And we try and make jokes of it, code switching. At one point we said, oh wait, next minute we say, nah, I can't one, and we're code switching. But in reality, it's a tension. We don't know which world we're in. we're standing in. And mix that with the anxiety, we now have our own trauma here. So you guys have given us our own trauma. We have to give you your own trauma. You now give us your own trauma. Thank you very much. So, and then you have now my own kids, right? Your kids, our own kids. And they are now reclaimers. What they try to do is say, who are we? Who am I? Am I Nigerian? Am I Igbo? Am I English? What am I? Right? And they're also trying to understand what happened with the Biafra war. A lot of them. Some of the biggest activists on TikTok about Biafra are GMYs, younger people, our kids. Believe it or not, they were not in the war. It's called post-memory. They're like, yes, that's what I heard. I want to research it. I must find out on the internet. I must find out in the library. This war. You see what I mean? So again, they're focused on psychological healing at last. But they have to take the third generation to start to look at healing. So here's the diaspora paradox, right? Now, we are in the diaspora. But how did the war affect our experience with the diaspora? Well, the first thing is this whole issue of the exit option. So the exit option is like, and who are we? Are we a citizen of UK? Are we citizens of Nigeria? I know that we have 2 passports for convenience, but who do we really identify with? You know, it's almost like we are here, right? Knowing that any small thing that happens here, you can fade back home, right? Well, yes, but that's the point is that you see, Indian people, they don't think it that way. If anything happens here, they're here. They're not going to go start going to India. They're here. But we are like, no, we're half here, half there, we're going to go back. And that's because trauma, again, we are afraid that what happened there could happen here. So we have to start running there. And so that's why you have the 2 passports is a key thing. If you don't have 2 passports, you're in trouble. Because by the time you get your visa, the thing don't kill you that's happening here. So, right? So everyone's holding their 2 passports, 10 years guaranteed, ready to move. But then it creates another problem as well. Ghost mansions. So you're saying like, if anything happened to me, I'll go there. So you now go and build one massive mansion. I know why we build houses, because if a man dies, he can't be buried in his parents' house. He has to be buried in his own house. I understand. But doesn't mean that because you're buried in your own house now, it has to be a 16-bedroom, 100-bathroom, if any. But the reality is that we are still thinking back home, even though we're here. And that confuses us. But more importantly, it confuses our children. Right? Because now our children are like, well, what am I going to do with this 16-bedroom, 100-bathroom house? Right? When you go. So, again, a result of trauma. Right? And then there's the identity gap. And this affects the likes of myself, third generation, my children, and their children. And that's the issue of, we know that there is something wrong with us, but we don't understand it's nameless grief. You see, trauma is a form of grief, endless grief. You're grieving because you're suffering, you're grieving because a lot of people died around you, you're grieving because you lost who you are for the Biafra war, and you're not doing anything about it. It's endless grief, right? And then your children and children's children recognize that subconsciously, and are managing it and dealing with it. But at the same time, they want to be Western, but they're dealing with the grief of Biafra through the whole Niger culture. We're stuck, right? So these are all the issues around trauma. It's real, it's relevant, it's scientific, and it's plaguing our community, and we don't even recognize it. The question now is, how do we heal? How do we break the silence, the cycle of silence, right? And that's survival mode. How do we stop being in survival mode and start relaxing and saying we accept who we are? Everyone knows that the final stage of grief is acceptance. When are we going to accept that what happened to us happened in a moment of time and move on? Because that will remove all of, and then we start building communities again. I don't have to look at you and say, now what angle are you, this thing said to me, what angle are you using now? Which kind of sense are you using? I don't know, I don't know. We don't have to do that anymore, right? Because we can trust again. So how do we do that? So the first one is individual healing. Now, remember we talked about biology, right? So epigenetics works both ways. Your environment can affect you negatively, but your environment can affect you positively. So you can now start doing things to yourself. So it's called like somatic body work. I know it's big Oyibo word, but what it means is it's using your muscles and also your spine and neural conditioning to actually just change how your body works, right? So basically removing stresses, physically removing stresses from your body so that your genetic expression changes. Your genes now say stress is not an issue for me now. I can relax and open new switches, right? It's called somatic body work or TRE, trauma release exercises, right? Just basically discharge nervous system tension. Decolonizing your diet. Your diet is colonial. So your burgers, or is it your Big Mac, and your Subways, that's not Oyibo food, it's colonial food, right? Now, the reason why the food is worse for you than the Oyibo person, right, is because you're more predisposed because of the trauma of having problems with the sugar than Oyibo people who probably didn't go through that trauma, right? And so therefore, you've got to now go back to how it used to be. Apple and Ofodo. But, decolonize your diet. Go back to who you used to be. But when I say apple, you're not a farmer. I'm not saying that the soup will be like this. And the apple is like this. No. The apple is like this and the soup is like this. Right? So, communal healing. You've got to start to talk to each other about the war. Start talking to each other. Name the war. Go through experiences. More importantly, don't just say, this is what happened to me. I was going to the street. The bomb went off. I had to run. That's fine. We're talking about how did it make you feel? How did it impact your life? What do you think about every day about this? Let's talk about it, right? And also, basically shifting the umuna, so moving the extended family and community gatherings from levies to talking about the war, to mental support. See, okay, like in your umuna, and like in ICAM as well, all we're talking about in meetings is pay your dues, donate. I know that because I was the expert at that. Bring your money, Joe. Right? So, and then we go home. But maybe we should also spend time being a support network. Not just at Tunike who were in the war, but also the younger ones as well, because they are traumatized from the trauma of the parents. Right? And then we have cultural healing. So, you rather than start thinking about we are defying the government or defying institutions, start accepting institutions again. Because even if they're going to let you down, forgiveness will always make it better for you, even if you get down again. That's why when Jesus said, turn the other cheek, I don't mean literally, everyone thinks he meant it literally. No, it was metaphorically. It meant that you have to continue to forgive, 77 times 7, right? Continue to forgive, because it's better for you, even if they let you down again. Same with us as people. Or will always be in a state of anxiety. So healing is not forgetting, right? It is teaching our nervous systems that we survived. Meaning we survived. Those that died, but those that survived are here. So be here and enjoy being here. And if you have any issues, start to deal with them together. So, know your history. It's finished now. Know your history. Read it. Read about it. Speak about it. Talk about it. Teach it to your children. Teach it to yourselves. My mom wrote a book about the Biafran War, right? I'm not here to sell the book. I'm trying to say that she wrote the book as a form of cathartic therapy.
Yeah.
That's my point.
Yeah.
She sit down and wrote that thing so that she can get her pain out in the open, right? It was an exercise.
Yeah.
I'm the one that's making it like, oh, it's a book, let's make it, let's do guy with it. But the reality is that it was a psychological exercise. Everyone should do it. That we're in the war, right? And name your trauma. Talk about it. Seek healing. If you need to see a therapist, right? What's the big deal? Talk about it. Talk about it with someone you trust, a therapist, a friend, your parents, whatever, and build trust. Reconstruct the institutions that we live in. If you recognize, my final point, if you recognize that we were in the war and we suffered from the war and we're traumatized and we haven't let go of that trauma. And it's impacting our children and our children's children through epigenetics and behavioral traits. We must start to talk to each other and bring it out. Thank you very much. Any questions quickly?
Any question should be, I will give you a text message to UGOEJU. Because I am a